Generative AI is already widely embedded in higher education, both among faculty and in student workflows. 75% of faculty report having used AI at least once. Somewhere around 35% are using it regularly, and somewhere around 85 to 95% of students are using AI tools for their coursework. And some of those statistics are a little on the older side, and probably, I would say, especially on the faculty using AI regularly part, it is higher than advertised. So, from our perspective, the relevant question here is not whether AI belongs in higher ed classrooms. That horse has already left the barn. It's whether or not AI is governed in a way that promotes educationally effective uses. So the core issues here are for both faculty and students, and they are literacies, and I say that with a plural because there isn't just one kind of AI literacy. So literacies and competencies. So in terms of use, even regular use is not going to provide proficiency with the tool. And in terms of exposure, even the constant drumbeat of exposure that we have all experienced over the last several years when it comes to AI is not the same thing as literacy in that area. AI adoption has outpaced institutional guidance, and guidance has been focused, we think, too much on risk mitigation and too little on building the competencies needed to use generative AI in a critical and constructive and educationally appropriate way. So, not meeting the reality of AI's pervasiveness leads to a number of really important downsides. It leads to over-reliance of AI, so use of AI in situations where it isn't appropriate, and that is, among other things, wasteful of resources. An inability to think critically and to evaluate AI's output, a kind of Dunning-Kruger effect on steroids, where users have the constant delusion of competence, even though they aren't actually competent in the subjects that AI is coaching them on, because they don't have the situated knowledge to back it up. Overuse of AI may also lead to psychological harms like addiction that is analogous to social media addiction that we see has become so pervasive over the last decade and a half. And arguably, misuse can lead to a situation where it can have lasting degradation of recall and of critical thinking skills. So this is the Meryl, help me out here. Cognitive.
It's the cognitive impairment.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the word that I was looking for. It's the cognitive impairment problem. Misuse can also lead to a loss of trust in the classroom. So cracks in trust necessary for effective course experiences. Faculty need to be able to trust that students aren't using AI in clandestine ways to cheat. But equally, students need to be able to trust their classmates and their instructors that, those other people in the room aren't secretly robots, that they're not using AI to give feedback, to engage in discussions on their behalf in things like that. So for this discussion, we are going to be talking about generative AI as a subset of the broader field of artificial intelligence. And generative AI creates new original content like text, images, audio, and code by learning patterns from vast amounts of existing data and then extrapolating based on those patterns. And this is distinct from other kinds of AI and machine learning applications, which folks who are sciencier in the room may already be using in other ways. And it's also important to recognize that generative AI is ubiquitous in ways that we don't necessarily see and can't control. So, for example, if you've done a Google search in the last 2 years, there's been some AI backend, even if it's not showing an AI summary at the top. So that is where we want to start. What I will say is that for us, that is for Meryl and for me, for most common use cases, we tend to treat generative AI as something in between an intern and a calculator. What that means is that we think it has enormous potential to extend our capabilities as thinkers and as writers, but at the same time, it requires structured, ongoing supervision from a user with both technical skill and subject area knowledge in order to keep it on track. And our goal here is to give you the context to build institution specific policies that can help your community achieve those ends. So, what I want to talk about to get us started down that road is there's this stereotype that faculty are skeptical of AI use and students are all in, but recent data shows that that's not exactly the case. So, in a new EDUCAUSE survey, actually, that was released yesterday, 44% of faculty and staff report that students primarily feel a mix of caution and enthusiasm toward AI, and 15% report that students are cautious or very cautious. Um, in a 2026 survey of undergraduate students from inside higher ed, 40% were worried about AI dependence and the erosion of their ability to think independently. 55% say that they think that AI will negatively affect their career prospects, and 20% say that they prefer not to use AI at all in their coursework. So compare this to a late 2025 study from the American Association of Colleges and Universities, where 95% of faculty were concerned with student over-reliance, 90% were concerned about diminishing critical thinking skills, and 49% were concerned about AI's effect on students' future careers. The proportions are different, but the prevailing concerns are largely the same. Yet, even as of the end of May 2026, those numbers that we gave you about student use remain consistent. There's a kind of prisoner's dilemma effect going on where students can't pull back on generative AI because the next guy might be using it to get ahead. And also, not using AI might not actually be the desired outcome. According to that same EDUCAUSE survey that I had mentioned a minute ago, only 15% of faculty and staff say that they have unit level policies to support how they use AI, and only 18% say that they have institution level policies. Yet a large majority agree that AI can be helpful in education and that students should learn how to use it. So, what this suggests is that weeding out AI may not be the goal. The goal is to think about how do you have thoughtful, coherent policies, like I said, that will help us do this well. So I want to show you a little bit of research that Meryl and I have worked on to help better plan this AI policy thing. To help better plan, we've constructed four personas that cut across students and faculty, and you can see them mapped here in terms of enthusiasm and knowledge. This isn't a precise mathematical map. This is just sort of impressionistically where these four personas fall. These are based on interviews and interactions that we've had mostly with faculty and students at Penn, and they keep evolving as we talk to more folks about where they fall in the attitudes toward AI scale. So our four typologies are the enthusiast, the technician, the skeptic, and the worrywart. So let's start with the enthusiast. The enthusiast, who you can see here on the middle in the right, is high adoption and high optimism and high use. They know something about AI. They know something about how to use AI from the perspective of a consumer, but they also might overestimate AI's effectiveness. So if you've ever been at dinner with somebody and they pulled out their phone and they were like, let me chat with ChatGPT about an answer to your question, that's really like the core enthusiast behavior, right? Whenever there's a problem, AI is going to be there to help. The second persona that I want to talk to you about is the technician. The technician is focused on task-oriented use, and they have a procedural outlook on AI. They believe that problems with AI can be solved by better technical design. So they iterate and they verify, but they do this within a really narrow frame. That frame is how do we make the software better? And it has a sort of when you're a hammer, everything's a nail feel. And I'll give you an example of this with a student who I worked with a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, I was talking to students about the problem of AI hallucinations and how you shouldn't necessarily believe everything that is outputted from a chatbot. And he raises his hand. He's like, I'm an engineer. I have this technology in my back pocket called retrieval augmented generation. Some of you may have heard of this. This is a RAG that cuts down on hallucinations. And I'm like, that's great, but there's also a social component to this that we should also be talking about. Like you can cut down on hallucinations, you can make that trade, but that's the beginning of a story, not the end of a story. And where the technician may lack scope is in that social situatedness of the technology. The third of these personas that I want to talk to you about is the skeptic. They are limited use and selective engagement. You can see them at the top left in blue on this graph. They are not uniformly anti-AI. Instead, what they are is really knowledgeable about the risks, the limits, and the most and least effective use cases for AI technologies. They are folks who balance curiosity with caution. And if it sounds like I am treating them a little bit more gently than the technician and the enthusiast, I am really sorry for that. I would say that most of the time, both Meryl and I fall into this skeptic category. You could also view them as highly informed naysayers, but I think that that's not the end of the story. And I want to give you an example about that. Meryl and I have a colleague who is sort of the skeptic of skeptics when it comes to AI. And her attitude has been, well, look at the resource waste that this causes. Well, Meryl brought her a tool from Arizona State University that you input images and it produces descriptions in alt texts. And she was like, this is great. I want to deploy this. And why was this great? This is great because it is a narrow scope that is confined to a task that we know that AI is really good at, and where there's been a lot of testing so that we know that the output from this tool is good. She is not anti-AI. She is pro responsible and thoughtful and evidence-based use of AI. Like that's her position. The last one of these that I want to show you is in the lower left in purple, and it's the worrywart. And this is not an AI specific persona. You have probably been around these folks in other contexts. They were the folks who were like, I can't possibly use Quicken to track my finances. I don't want to accidentally touch something and break it and have my bank accounts emptied out, right? They're that person. The worrywart avoids use. They tend to have low knowledge and they tend to emphasize the risks when they think about their potential uses of the technology. So to give you one AI example, I talked with a student not too long ago who said, I don't really understand the AI policy in my professor's syllabus. And so I'm just not going to use it. I'm just going to leave it aside and let it alone and not use it at all because I am worried about accidentally breaking the rules and then getting in trouble and ending up in an academic disciplinary hearing. Right? So their response to I don't understand this isn't let's go find out more. Their response is, whoa, wait a minute, this is a lot of extra work and I don't really want any part of it. So a couple of things about these personas. One is that they aren't stable identities. People can move from one to the other and do all the time. I would say that I'm currently in the technician period myself. I'm doing a lot of vibe coding these days, and I love it. I'm even tending toward enthusiast sometimes, but like my default position is as a skeptic. The second thing is that every persona here brings value to the room. Like you really need to talk to all of these people when you're thinking about developing an AI policy, especially because all of these people cut across power hierarchies at your institution. Right? There are worrywarts who are staff, there are worrywarts who are students, there are worrywarts who are faculty. And all of those folks deserve a voice, but I think working with faculty who might have an outsized say in policy creation, like you really need to know where they stand. And then the third piece is that what this does is balance the needs of folks represented in these four personas. Doing that can help build consensus and help improve how we write about and implement policies. Like, not only are policies written with all four personas in mind going to appease these folks, they're just going to be better policies in the end. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to
Yeah.
Meryl to talk about balancing needs with effective use.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. So let's think about if our goal is to build policies that discourage ineffective use and maintain the needs of our different constituents, we need to ask what constitutes effective use. Um, and I want to kind of walk through some of the terms and some of the stages that we've come up with. So one of the places that we see common use comes in, this is something that's been documented by the British Higher Education Policy Institute. The most common uses are explaining concepts, summarizing articles, suggesting research ideas, that's particularly for students, using AI to structure thinking and to use AI to generate first drafts. And we'd suggest thinking about this in a very different way. We know generative AI in particular, but AI more broadly, is especially good at pattern matching. This is what it is built for. So we would suggest that the best value uses are the ones that lean on that strength. And this eliminates some of that waste. This eliminates some of our concerns about the unintended consequences of this technology. So, for example, rather than having an AI bot generating ideas, have it organize one's own ideas and help students to build an outline. It can be really productive for, again, doing that kind of gap analysis and proofreading and copy editing work. But again, this needs guardrails. Um, Rather than having it summarize meeting notes, and I don't know how many of you have tried this, I'm sure you noticed when you did that it tends to misattribute things and overestimate the value of certain parts of meetings and underestimate the values of others. Instead, suggest that it structure and organize those meeting notes so that they are easier to use. What AI is especially good at is analyzing large data sets. It can be with good guardrails, very helpful with language translation, assuming that the language in question is part of its data set. Also, we know that given appropriate guardrails and use, it can be helpful at drafting code. Adam was talking about his own work at vibe coding. I experiment with that as well. I will admit myself that I tend to go somewhere between the skeptic and the technician myself. Um, so thinking about these suggested uses really aligns with a lot of our existing institutional concerns about academic integrity. So having AI write on your behalf is something that we identify with plagiarism, but it's also a really bad use of the technology. Um, Not only is it not useful and ineffective to have AI summarize your readings for you, those summaries, as I already said, are frequently inaccurate and they often miss important context and key ideas. So there's a lot of territory, even with regular chatbots, that are unexplored or undocumented. So one of the things we are going to really strongly recommend is that you build in places for faculty, staff, students to experiment. This is going to help inform and give shape to policies that are going to really support the strengths of the institution. With all of this, what we believe, Adam and I, is that we can write pro innovation, pro education AI policies for institutions that build AI literacy and competency, that respect people's different levels of enthusiasm for the technology, and also be respectful of the context of our institutions and the world we live in. One of the many difficult conversations that we see in research literature is that higher ed is getting tasked kind of unfairly with teaching AI literacy. But because outside of higher ed, there really isn't a skill set to do this, and there isn't an in-house training structure to do it well, this is why it's sort of fallen to all of us by default. So let's think about what might this look like for us? Can we create a plan? If we were to think about a map of goals, we would be thinking about a set of priorities, and we need to know what our goals are. Well, we can think about this in three categories. We can think about what subject matter knowledge are you trying to build? This is something that we would talk about at the course, the program level, the unit level. And what is the goal in mind? How do students need to learn from you? And what do they need to learn from you in order to use these tools? What do you and your students need to know to be functionally information literate in terms of this technology? And I want to go back to Adam's point earlier about technology literacies are a multiple thing. We have so much more to say on this, and we tried to keep this kind of directed, but this is something we could talk more about in the Q&A if you're interested. Where are there areas of concern or trust that either need co-created rules or some kind of clear layout of expectations? And this gets to some of the trust conversations that we were talking about earlier. And where can you build in a place for a release valve or places to experiment with emerging ways of using a tool that don't violate campus disciplinary or course level policies, that could be creative ways to explore using these tools more effectively? Finally, we want to recommend building in some kind of regular mechanism to share techniques, build knowledge, and address concerns on a regular but not onerous basis. And I would make a case that the symposium that we are part of today is part of such a conversation. So we're thrilled to be here for it. One of the things we want to strongly recommend is that this is not a place to be reinventing wheels. So at the institution level, what options already exist that communicate what appropriate or acceptable use of any technology, in this case AI, would look like? You want to build on what you've got. These are things that involve student data security, institutional data security, copyright and intellectual property, and academic integrity. Build on these things. Build on institutional knowledge. Within the institution, different people on campus have enough expertise to add to creating a workable plan of action that will create as few logistical barriers as possible, because these are the folks who know what the policies as they exist already are. The other piece of that is building in the transparency that creates that trust that we're after. We want to bring people together to brainstorm and generate these tools. So there's really two approaches we want to talk about. One is about exploration, and one is about working within time constraints. I'm going to talk about the time constraint piece first. So this one really starts from surveys. Creating surveys for the different constituencies within the institution of administration, frontline staff, faculty, students. What are their concerns and needs? You can't necessarily have a complete conversation with everybody, but as we've already been talking about, making sure people's concerns and voices are included helps a lot. Bring your campus experts on emerging technology use in the relevant settings together to work through individual sets of needs. This deals again with a lot of the transparency questions, and it also makes sure that needs that might have been buried or assumptions that we might make because we don't know the other parties or regularly engage with them, and we don't necessarily see what their needs are or what their concerns are. And this might mean having representatives from a constituency that have sufficient understanding of their group to help evaluate a plan, to reduce unintended or unanticipated consequences, or maybe just to take advantage of new or unexpected opportunities. So, this survey approach helps you learn pretty quickly while respecting your constituencies with their range of priorities and demands on their time. The other approach, the exploratory approach, really thinks from pilot projects. It can take a little longer, but I don't necessarily think these two approaches are necessarily um, contradictory. They can complement one another if it's possible to do both. So, using the exploratory approach, use your campus learning design experts help select or allow a small number of programs or courses explore different approaches to AI and integration that reflect the needs of the discipline, rather than just going all in on a tool and then finding what doesn't work, going from a place where you can experiment before you think about scale. So, the different needs of the discipline can really vary. So there are disciplines that require clear foundational knowledge, like STEM, disciplines where knowledge is built systematically through a range of approaches and techniques, like in the humanities, disciplines where knowledge is built collaboratively, like in the social sciences, disciplines where knowledge is built through application, like business or other professional programs. You want to make sure that these pilots have evaluation built in, and this is where smart metrics can really be extraordinarily helpful here, making sure that the metrics are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and have a time limit, can let you identify what works and what needs further investigation. In any case, being in conversation with each other is the key thing. And I think Simon Fraser has made a huge start with this session. And I know there are ongoing conversations happening on campus. Whatever approach you take, it's just important not to do it in isolation. Keep in close contact with the stakeholders in your institution, regular meetings that let you ideate and share progress, keeping sure that diverse voices are at the table. This includes our fork persona, but this really is after making sure all of the different constituencies we've talked about. This includes faculty and students. I think one of the hard parts is keeping up with what's going on at other institutions. Every institution of higher learning is struggling with these problems. We shouldn't be struggling in isolation, but there are communities, professional communities, that are exploring this, and these are great places to have some of those conversations. I'm happy to talk more about that in the discussion. So, what are potential outcomes? These range. It all depends on what you prize about education at your institution. Um, there are a number of examples of colleges and universities exploring AI in the learning environment, and we'll share a link to that a little bit later on. So, one of the things we want to invite you to do over the course of these next 2 days is be thinking about what makes SFU and your units within it unique and need to be prioritized and um, celebrated. AI technologies can be very useful, but they are not a black box solution, nor are they necessarily the end to what you already do. They absolutely carry their own costs, both economic, environmental, and in terms of the needs of your workforce that have to be balanced. In the end, they can augment what you value when your goals are clearly in mind. We have some other things to consider, and I think this is important. This is something that Sherry alluded to in her introduction, and I want to come back to. Um, there are issues for security and privacy. There is an ongoing effort to address this, and a lot of this happens through what's called the walled garden approach, which is usually through enterprise solutions that protects data security for the institution, for faculties, for students, as well as user privacy. And this is a great one for our worrywarts. It's absolutely ideal for our worrywarts. I have conversations with my students about this, and this once they realize that there is a place where they can safely explore, a lot of their concerns get alleviated. Not all, but a lot. Concerns for environmental impact. Um, Here, training for effective use of platforms is absolutely key, and guardrails around tool use in any custom bot design becomes necessary. I want to give you a couple of examples. At the class level, in class X, one student creates 250 queries within one 24-hour period, which blows the budget for the course and prevents other classmates from having access to just-in-time support the night before an exam. Now, the good news is, as any technician will tell you, is this can be built into the custom bots training. So there's a solution that's already there. This also prevents abuse of the tool and helps people have guardrails around the limits of their use of it. In class Y, some students refuse to use AI tools because of its impact on the environment. This can be their concern might be energy use, it might be water use, it might be impact on communities, it might be ethical concerns around LLM training, which is a whole other conversation, and many more. So, one thing to build in is what other options are there? Or is there a way of framing tool use that will help students understand how to mitigate their concerns and use them effectively when they need to? Um, this is not our first rodeo with technology change and emerging technologies. No new technology comes without some kind of confusion or upheaval. We all start from our own perspectives and expert knowledge and personal experiences, and we all have a vital role to play in developing policies and strategies that are right for our institutions and our roles. So, Adam and I want to end where we began with some context. In 2026, generative AI is transforming teaching and learning, but transformational technologies are honestly rather common. 20 years ago, it was handheld computing. In 10 years before that, it was the World Wide Web. 10 years before that was the personal computer. Before that was everything from the airplane and the automobile and the telephone and the typewriter and corrective lenses and on and on and on. Few of these transformations have happened as fast as generative AI, with as little time to absorb them into our practices. And I'd argue personally, and I think Adam agrees, that this is where a lot of the confusion lies right now. While our specific tools are changing quickly, I think the thing to comfort you, the worry ward in your head, is the underlying technology is moving a lot more slowly and incrementally. Seeing that allows us a little more leeway to address it at our pace rather than OpenAI or Anthropic's. And it also lets us be proactive rather than reactive when the tech world appears to shift on us. So I think we're going to stop there. And we wanted to ask you what questions you have for us.